Нет, называли коллизия. Да. уши приложено. надо же иметь. Ну ладно, ну смотри. Ну да. По смертности, как бы. Ну, в моем случае. Требуешь исследований, требуешь. Ладно, ну, значит, нет. Значит, ну да, значит, все дело не печально. Скоростные. Вот даже не люблю. Нет, всегда нормально, больше, всегда нормально. Вот. Уговорил. Идеально. Грегор Макфидер. Макфидер, в смысле, там Питер, а Питер говорит, шутка у тебя. Не знаю, что там. Что там? Запретили ношение носков, носов. Это что такое? Да, Right. А, у меня тоже такая была, кстати, знаете. Почему бы да? Ну, говорят, ну, это даем, что Die Woche. Oi, não vidas. Ideal.
Tüte auf, heißes Wasser drauf und voila, fertig sind die Instant-Nudeln. Die kleine Revolution am Snackhimmel. Sie sind lecker, preiswert und schnell zubereitet. Um mehr über das leckere Fastfood zu erfahren, schauen wir bei Wissen for Free heute nach Japan. Dort wurden die sogenannten Ramen nämlich erfunden. Ein Japaner verzehrt übrigens im Schnitt mehr als 40 Packungen pro Jahr. Und weltweit werden sogar über 100 Milliarden Packungen jährlich konsumiert. Doch woher kommt eigentlich der Hype um die japanische Nudelsuppe? Entwickelt wurden die Instant-Nudeln als Produkt der Nachkriegszeit in Japan. Nach dem Zweiten Weltkrieg litten viele Einwohner Hunger und die Warteschlangen vor den Essensständen waren oft sehr lange. Momofuku Ando nahm dies zum Anlass, um ein Produkt zu schaffen, das lange haltbar und zudem jederzeit verfügbar ist. Und so vermarktete seine Firma Nissin Foods 1958 erstmals Instant-Nudeln unter dem Namen Chicken-Ramen. 13 Jahre später brachte Nissin dann die Cup-Noodles auf den Markt, das erste Nudelprodukt im Becher. Mittlerweile kennt man das Fertiggericht weltweit unter vielen verschiedenen Markennamen. Die Bechernudeln werden als vorgekochter und getrockneter Nudelblock mit Gewürzpulver und Öl, das sich oft in einer separaten Packung befindet, verkauft. Und so geht's. Die Aromapäckchen zu dem getrockneten Nudelblock geben, mit kochendem Wasser übergießen und ca. 2 Minuten einweichen lassen. Danach kann direkt aus dem Becher gegessen werden. Die Hauptzutaten für die getrockneten Nudeln sind Weizenmehl, Palmöl und Salz. Der getrocknete Nudelblock wurde dabei ursprünglich durch Frittieren produziert. In westlichen Ländern hingegen werden sie meistens luftgetrocknet. Fun Fact: Ramen war.
I would say out of all the things that I'm expert in, I think the number one thing is in fatigue. That's definitely a certification that you can't get from any university. You have to get it from the School of Hard Knocks. But I personally have been so tired for so many years and then overcame that fatigue and then helped tens of thousands of people. So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to show you how to get your energy back. I was doing all the wrong things. I was trying to take all these pills and vitamins, but there was something else underneath my fatigue that I was missing. And until years later, when I finally figured it out, it was like I took a helmet off my head and I finally woke up. So let's talk about the 7 reasons why you're tired. The first reason is adrenal fatigue. You have too much cortisol. What's interesting about cortisol, it's a stress hormone that adapts your body to stress. And under stress, your body switches to running on glucose. Despite what your diet is, if you have too much stress, your body's going to basically run on glucose. This is why there's another name for cortisol. Glucocorticoid. Okay, it's a glucocorticoid. It's a glucose type hormone meant for short-term energy. It's supposed to give you energy, but it ends up making you tired because it's going to mobilize a lot of glucose that's stored in your liver, and it's also going to make glucose out of protein and fat. It's called gluconeogenesis. So here you are having all this glucose flowing through your bloodstream, and then your blood sugar is going to increase, and then insulin's going to come in there and push it down. So when you go through chronic stress, that's when things start to go downhill, and all that glucose will just make you thoroughly exhausted. All right, so the more stress you have, the more your body runs on sugar. Now, there's a little gland in the brain called amygdala, and it's very similar to the adrenal glands on top of the kidney, but it works on your brain. In other words, it addresses a certain type of stress in your brain, and that specific stress is a fear type stress. It's a fear response. So amygdala has everything to do with different shades of fear, whether it's a very high level fear like you're shy to a major panic attack or you're terrified, or right in the middle you have anxiety or you have worry. All those are fear states. And so anytime you have a fear state, the amygdala is involved, and it's going to affect a lot of different biological processes, like your ability to sleep, like your ability to get into a calm state. And anything that's related to fear is going to get you to avoid that fear. You probably heard of the saying, you must face your fears, right? Well, when you face your fears, they no longer are fears, because fear is about avoiding something. And as soon as you don't avoid it and you face it, you don't have it anymore. But the best remedies for an adrenal stress situation or an overactive amygdala would be to take vitamin B1, okay? Good amounts of B1 in the form of nutritional yeast. That is going to make you feel very calm. Now, some other things you can do is take ashwagandha. I have some more information on that in a link down below. But ashwagandha is an adaptogen. It increases your tolerance to stress. There's many other herbs that are adaptogens, but ashwagandha is one of the top herbs. And then we have sleep. More sleep, better control over your stress, better adrenal function. And I will get to sleep in a second. But the last thing I want to mention is physical work. And I have more That is going to make you feel very calm. Or and you face it, fears. Because fear is about avoiding something. And as soon as you don't avoid it and you face it, you don't have it anymore. But the best remedies for an adrenal stress situation or an overactive amygdala would be to take vitamin B1, okay? Good amounts of B1 in the form of nutritional yeast. That is going to make you feel very calm. Now, some other things you can do is take ashwagandha, just from B1, okay? Good amounts of B1 in the form of nutritional yeast. That is going to make you feel very calm. Now, some other things you can do is take ashwagandha. I have some more information on that in the link down below. But ashwagandha is an adaptogen. It increases your
Ach. So. B1.
work that you can start doing, it will really help you release that stress. Now, exercise is okay, but physical work is a lot better because physical work and also exercise helps to deplete that stress energy that tends to build up that prevents you from sleeping. All right, number 2, sleep, okay? Poor sleep will make you tired. And many times you can't sleep because you have high cortisol because you're stressed, especially if it's between 12 midnight and 2 o'clock in the middle of the night. That is when you're supposed to have the lowest amount of cortisol. But if your adrenals are overactive, that's the time that you're most awake. And I had a problem with that for years until I figured things out. Now, one thing about sleep, there's a sleep hormone called melatonin. I recently did a very interesting video on melatonin because there's 2 types of melatonin. There is one type that's in your bloodstream and in the pineal gland, but there's another type of melatonin that is in all of your cells. It's deep in the cells. It's called a subcellular melatonin. And the way that you increase that melatonin is through infrared. Did you realize that over 50% of the sun rays are infrared? So that infrared is actually increasing melatonin in all of your body's cells, which will greatly help your sleep. But another purpose of melatonin is to act as a powerful antioxidant, even more powerful than glutathione in your liver. And so melatonin is really important in countering all the stress that we experience and preventing a lot of oxidative damage and free radical damage. And so if you can get out in the sun, definitely do that for a good period of time. But if it's winter and you can't do that, you can also get infrared from a fireplace or a campfire or some candles or red light therapy. But the sensation of infrared is like the heat that you feel from the sun or from a fire or from a light, which will all counter the infrared wavelength and deplete your melatonin. So that's probably one of the reasons why people have a hard time sleeping, is they're sitting in front of a computer all day long and they can't seem to recharge the melatonin. Now, the other thing I'm going to recommend for sleep, which is a really great protocol, which I use on my body, is I take 4 of my sleep aid, okay, right before bed, about 20 minutes, and 3 of my D3 and K2. That seems to work very effectively to get into a really nice deep delta wave sleep, and it's allowed me to get like even up to 9 hours of sleep. So I will use that when I need to sleep a little bit longer, but presently my sleep cycles are in pretty good shape. Vitamin D3 helps like the wavelength and deplete your melatonin. So, but if it's winter and you can't do that, you can also get infrared from a fireplace or a campfire or some candles or red light therapy. But the sensation of infrared is like the heat that you feel from the sun or from a fire or from a light, like incandescent light. I'm not talking about the artificial lights that they have now, like from your computer and your cell phone, which will all counter the infrared wavelength and deplete your melatonin. So that's probably one of the reasons why people have a hard time sleeping, is they're sitting in front of a computer all day long and they can't seem to recharge the melatonin. Now, the other thing I'm going to recommend for sleep, which is a really great protocol, which I use on my body, is I take 4 of my sleep aid, okay, right before bed, about 20 minutes, and 3 of my D3 and K2, okay, I use on my body, is I take 4 of my sleep aid, okay, right before bed, about 20 minutes, and 3 of my D3 and K2. That seems to work very effectively to get into a really nice deep delta wave sleep, and it's allowed me to get like even up to 9 hours of sleep. So I will use that when I need to sleep a little bit longer, but presently my sleep cycles are in pretty good shape. Vitamin D3 helps to reset the sleep centers. It's great for jet lag, and it's very, very important in sleep cycles. And so taking vitamin D right before you go to bed is actually going to help you sleep. It's not going to wake you up. All right, number 3, post-viral syndrome, okay? So let's just say you just had COVID or some type of viral flu, and now you have this residual fatigue. You have chronic fatigue syndrome. Now, the medical term for this is called myalgic encephalomyelitis. Now, what does that mean? That's a fancy term for you have a combination of muscle pain and inflammation and soreness with inflammation of your brain causing cognitive deficits as well as fatigue. Now, that medical condition mimics the symptoms of a B1 deficiency as well as a B3 deficiency. So really what I think is going on is you have this inflammatory immune response, and it's creating massive oxidation, massive free radical damage. And you're going into this infection with an already empty bucket of B vitamins. And the residual fatigue that you have from this infection is really a vitamin deficiency. That's what it is. Primarily vitamin B1, but also the other B vitamins, as well as other nutrients as well. And so if you just had an infection and you start taking nutritional yeast and or B1, try to find a natural source, and you also took vitamin D3 with zinc, okay, you're going to start to have more energy. There's some other things that you can take too as powerful antioxidants like NAC, and not taking in melatonin, but being exposed to the infrared, which naturally increases melatonin, which I already mentioned is a very powerful antioxidant, probably even more powerful than glutathione. Now, the other point I want to bring up about viruses is that when you have existing viruses that are dormant in your body, they're called latent viruses. Okay, so you had an infection, let's say in high school, like Epstein-Barr virus, and then 20 years later, it comes out of remission. It usually comes out of remission when you experience stress, because cortisol is an immune suppressive hormone. So it actually lowers your immune system. This is why a lot of people are on prednisone for all sorts of infections, because it gets rid of the symptoms. But what it's really doing, it's wiping out the inflammation, but it's also wiping out the entire immune response. So when you have high levels of cortisol, your immune system temporarily goes to sleep, and the door opens up for these viruses to come out and kick you down. So if you have any type of post-viral symptoms, whether it's fatigue or whatever, do whatever you can to find the cause of your stress and try to get rid of it, because it's going to be really hard to get rid of that fatigue if you still have the stress situation that's unresolved. And unfortunately, losses can be a part of that as well. It's called bereavement. When you go through losses, the cortisol increases, the stress increases, and the viruses can come out and create all sorts of problems as well. So in that case, if you have that situation, definitely follow the things that I'm talking about: getting more sleep, getting more nutrition, getting IR, taking certain nutrients, etc. All right. Another cause of fatigue is having Lyme disease. And that comes from a spirochete, which is a type of bacteria that can go in your body and create an immune reaction. All of the symptoms from Lyme are actually coming from your own immune system trying to kill off this microbe, but it can't find it. So I recommend doing a natural type antibiotic, and that would be something like oregano, garlic, thyme, sage, things that are natural that can help boost your immune system, but without the side effects. Number 5, insulin resistance. Okay, if you're on a high carb diet, realize that your garlic immune system trying to kill off this microbe sorts of problems as well. So in that case, if you have that situation, definitely follow the things that I'm talking about: getting more sleep, getting more nutrition, getting IR, taking certain nutrients, etc. All right. Another cause of fatigue is having Lyme disease. And that comes from a spirochete, which is a type of bacteria that can go in your body and create an immune reaction. All of the symptoms from Lyme are actually coming from your own immune system trying to kill off this microbe, but it can't find it. So I recommend doing a natural type antibiotic, and that would be something like oregano, garlic, thyme, sage, things that are natural that can help boost your immune system, but without the conscious, because that's what carbs do. They make your brain go to sleep. So you're going to definitely need a nap after you eat. When you go on a low carb diet, it actually wakes up your brain. You actually become more conscious. You are running your brain on ketones, which is a preferred fuel. And so if you haven't already gone on a ketogenic diet with intermittent fasting, that could create the biggest effect on your energy more than anything. And I did put a link down below for those of you that are new to that topic. All right, number 6, low stomach acids. If you don't have stomach acid, especially if as you get older and you lose the acidity in your stomach, you're not going to be able to absorb B12. You're not going to be able to absorb iron too well. Both of those conditions can cause anemia. You're not going to be able to break down protein too well. That can cause fatigue. You're going to be more susceptible to getting SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, That can make you tired, not to mention all the digestive problems that you're going to have. Those can make you tired as well. And the simple remedy is a combination of apple cider vinegar and betaine hydrochloride. We just realized that you need to take a lot of it in the beginning. You need to take 5 to 6 to 7 tablets right before you eat for some weeks before you really start to turn things around, because betaine hydrochloride is not a very concentrated amount of hydrochloric acid. It's a very weak type of acid that takes a while to build up. All right, and the last point I'm going to bring up is vitamin deficiencies. That can create fatigue. It's not as common, but it can create fatigue. And I just mentioned the B12, I just mentioned the iron, but I didn't mention potassium. In all of your cells, you have a sodium-potassium pump that generates electrical energy for your cells. So you need a lot of potassium to generate that energy. It's very easy to get sodium, but it's more difficult to get potassium. And the way you get that is through large amounts of salads. That's right. That can give you a lot of energy. So that's something, if you haven't done before, you might want to start increasing more salad to increase more potassium, as well as the next mineral, which is also involved in energy and ATP, which is magnesium. So you can get a lot of magnesium and potassium from having large salads. I notice on the days that I don't have a big salad, I'm a little more tired. Now, out of all the things you can do, the most important thing is to get your diet straightened out. I didn't know that in the past. And so I was trying to take all these vitamins and do all these different things on top of eating too many carbs. It never worked. So you need to get on keto and do intermittent fasting as a priority. Number 2, you want to work on your stress so you can then sleep. That's number 2, because they are connected. And then number 3, many times there could be some underlying residue from some post-infection, or you have this latent virus that's coming out of remission, in which case you need to take more D1, D3, zinc, and some of the other things that I recommend. All right, if you have not seen my video on melatonin, very important video, check it out right here.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Camera TV. I am Alicia, your host, and today we're going to talk all about dynamics. It's been brought to my attention that I haven't had a dedicated video about dynamics, so I figured that today's the day. We're going to live it up, we're going to talk about dynamics, and it'll be fun, I hope. What we're going to do in today's video is talk about what dynamics are, the basics, so even if you're just starting out, you'll be able to follow this video. I want to talk about dynamics across different musical eras, because the way you play dynamics changes depending if you're playing a Baroque piece or a modern piece, so we're going to touch on that. And then I'm going to give you some tips for being able to play dynamics effectively. Now, as far as I know, there's no implement this special tip and then 5 minutes later you have great dynamics forever. I haven't come across anything like that. If you have an insider tip that is gonna be amazing like that, just please let me and everyone else know. That would be great. So this video isn't gonna be instantly become amazing at dynamics, but I'm hoping that it'll give you some ideas of things that you can do in your practice to slowly over the course of time improve your ability to play dynamics. Anyway, let's get started. I really wanted to share this question that Virgil asked about dynamics, since it's the basis of the entire video and likely something many of you guys can relate to, including myself. So here it is. I'm an adult beginner who just started of March this year. Wow, that's pretty recent. And so this would have been in 2018 still, but I digress. And currently my piano teacher is gearing me towards ABRS in grade 3. As per subject, I'm currently having a little hiccup with dynamics, as I tend to either play too hard, too soft, and I frequently receive comments from my teacher about abrupt crescendos. I'm still developing my dynamic ear since I'm new to the piano, so I come to your YouTube channel to find some pointers and tips to get some enlightenment, but alas, none could be found, or maybe I missed it. No, I don't actually think, except for little bits and pieces and videos here and there, I haven't done a dedicated video. So anyway, that's what this is. A video focused around dynamics and how to practice dynamics. Before we get into the how of playing dynamics, let's talk about the what. What are dynamics? Well, dynamics are just symbols that represent volume. We have symbols like P, which stands for piano, that tells us to play quietly. We have these V-shaped lines telling us to get louder and to get quieter. Those are crescendos and decrescendos, and etc. What you see here on the screen are the basic dynamic markings you're going to be running into. Basically everything all the way from really, really soft to really, really loud. Although pianissimo and fortissimo are pretty uncommon. You won't come across them very much. If you're playing piano music that has like P over here and then later on it has an F, like so quiet and loud, that's going to be indicating that you want to do an abrupt change. You're basically going from quiet to loud with little to no transition. Now, if you're playing a piece of music that has, say, a P followed by a crescendo, and then maybe finished with the forte or a mezzo forte or something like that, it's telling you that you're going to go from quiet to loud gradually, note by note. Sometimes crescendos and diminuendos last for just a measure. Sometimes they last for many measures, but the idea is the same. You want to like gradually change your volume. So that's the what of dynamics. And before we talk tips and techniques and stuff like that, I want to talk about the different eras and how you'll apply dynamics in say, Bach and Baroque music versus Chopin and Romantic music and so on. In the Baroque period, between about 1600 and 1750, pianos as we know them today didn't exist. When people wrote and played keyboard music, it was usually on a harpsichord or clavichord, and organs were another popular keyboard as well. The harpsichord and clavichord just didn't have much capacity for dynamic expression, which is why dynamics written for Baroque music is so different. In Baroque music, you'll see terraced dynamics, which just means abrupt dynamic changes. You'll go from piano to mezzo piano with little transition, or you'll have even more dramatic changes like piano to forte. These sudden changes in volume were what keyboard instruments were capable of doing back in the day. They weren't really able to do anything more subtle. And this is important to keep in mind when you're playing music from this time period. In the classical period, between about 1750 and 1825, pianos were being built, developed, and fine-tuned. So composers at the beginning of the classical era, such as Haydn, would write a lot of keyboard sonatas for harpsichord, per se. But towards the end of the era, classical composers such as Beethoven would write sonatas on a more modern sounding piano. The damper pedals on these early pianos were very different, but dynamically they became more similar to pianos of today. So that's why you'll see much more extreme dynamic ranges in classical piano sonatas. So Beethoven especially, for example, was fond of fortissimo or fortissimo. In the Romantic period, from about 1825 to 1900, pianos became the thing that we know and love today. They went through a huge development. Things like the damper pedal improved, the volume and expressive quality is improved. And this is the era where you really saw piano superstars begin to pop up, such as Liszt and Alkin. In this era, composers really started adding dynamic detail to their music. You'll see plenty of accents, sforzandos, and other touch markings with a wide range of dynamic contrasts and plenty of crescendos and diminuendos. There also tends to be more detail with pedal markings, since this is when the piano had developed a modern style damper pedal. In the modern era, which is basically from 1900 to now-ish, dynamic markings are as variable as the era itself. You have early 20th century composers like Bartók who wrote these hyper-specific dynamics and articulations, basically leaving no note behind. And other similar composers would be guys like Kabalevsky, Shostakovich, etc. You have composers such as Debussy who insist on subtlety in their music, which is very, very different from the drama of the Romantic era. And then the kind of obscure sounding modernism era, and then like, yeah, jazz, pop, blues, all of those styles. Beyond that, it's good to have a grip on which dynamic styles were. You really just like have to like light touches is so crucial in that piece. But I can't tell you how many times I've heard piano students play it with like the sweeping Liszt style grand gestures, just like totally not appropriate for that style of music. When it comes down to it, playing dynamics on the piano is really just a matter of how quickly and firmly you press down a key. Quicker and firmer means a louder note, whereas slower and softer equals a quieter note. One thing that I've noticed over the years of teaching is that people tend to lean in one direction volumally. That's not a word. People tend to lean in one direction on the volume spectrum. So some people have a tendency to be quiet players, just naturally, and some people have a tendency to be like heavy-handed, and that's the camp that I fall into. And it's good to have an idea of where on the spectrum you fall, because then you can work on your weakness. So since I tend to be like a very like clangy, heavy-handed player, I'm really into the fortes, but I'm not so good at the pianos, then that gives me a sense that that's like where I need to spend more time. I need to focus on finding nuance in the quieter volumes. So here's one of the biggest tips I can give you about playing dynamics on the piano. This is like a physical tip, and it's just as abstracted as it is tangible. You really just have to feel it to understand what I'm saying. Project dynamics with your arms and not just your fingers. If you use only your fingers to create the force or softness, the tone will always be a little thin. So for example, your fortes with just finger strength will sound a little harsh, and your pianos will sound a little weightless and empty. Now I encourage you to experiment with this on your own, because you should be able to feel and hear the difference once you start playing around with it. See if you can notice it. But if you start playing with more weight from your arms as opposed to just your finger, you get a more robust dynamic tone. So your fortes will sound warm and open, and your pianos won't just disappear into thin air. It's really one of those things. You just need to sit down and play around with it so you can start feeling it out. Much of playing dynamics comes from experience and feedback. So if you're relatively new to the piano still, don't worry about it too much, because it does take quite a while to really train your ear and to train your body. For the first few years when I teach people piano, we tend to just focus on creating contrast. So we won't really focus on like nuance so much as being able to play a forte, being able to play a piano, and maybe we'll do like some of the ones in between. But it's more about, just like learning the bright, big, abrupt contrasts to start. One thing that I would recommend doing, even if you're just starting out, is record yourself playing regularly. And this is a useful thing to do for a lot of reasons. So specifically for dynamics, it'll help train your ear. And it's interesting how when we play, we can't hear, well, I can't hear like the harshness of my playing so much when I'm actually playing it. But when I sit back and listen to a recording, I can tell like, okay, that forte was really harsh. Or maybe, again, if you're the opposite, you tend to be a quiet player, you're like, ooh, that like barely came through. That was like an insubstantial wisp of air. So spend time developing a great forte first and a great piano first before starting to worry too much about the nuances. And again, this can take quite a long time. And you can practice these dynamics in your pieces, but you can also practice them with your technical exercises too. And that can actually be a way to liven up the scale. If you're used to playing your scales just like whatever default volume that you play at, it could be a good experience to experiment playing them quietly, or to play them loudly, or whatever. And that might bring some life into your technical exercises too. So you know how when you go to live theater and you're sitting in the audience, the actors on the stage like look pretty normal, but then when you see them up close, you're like, wow, they got a lot of makeup on. It's this idea of over-dramatizing that carries over to the piano and other creative forms of expression as well. One thing that I find really interesting is if you're just like sitting at the piano by yourself playing, you might play and be like, oh yeah, that was a great crescendo. But if you were listening to it as an audience member or just listening to a recording, you might realize like, oh, that barely came through at all. Oftentimes in our head, what we think is enough doesn't necessarily project outside of like our own head. And we often have to be more over dramatic than we think is necessary for it to sound the appropriate level of dramatic. Does that make sense? And again, this is something that you can improve and work on by recording yourself play. Just such a useful thing to do. It's kind of a pain, I get it, but it's so useful. I encourage you to exaggerate your dynamics, which has two benefits. The first one being that your dynamics become more noticeable and apparent, which is what we've already been talking about. And doing so gets you more comfortable playing with a wider dynamic range. Being comfortable with a wider dynamic range will help you eventually learn how to do subtlety. I truly believe you can't learn how to be subtle with something until you learn how to be really dramatic with it. So you have to start out here in order to figure out how to like, I don't know, get it in here. I don't know if this is making any sense with my wild gestures. And that's why I don't recommend learning music by guys like Debussy until Like, because Debussy's all about subtlety. So learning his music before you're a mature enough piano player to do so just usually ends up in a less ideal scenario, like we talked about in the past, like interpreting Debussy's music in a romantic way, or just not being able to like properly convey that. Another thing that'll help your dynamic playing is to really map out your dynamics across an entire piece. So for example, say that you're learning Liszt's Liebestraum number 3. There are 6 pages in this piece, and the crux or climax of the piece is on page 4, which is what you can see on the screen right now. Now, it's worth getting a sense of where the climactic moments of your piece is and then work around that. So if page 4 requires my weightiest, most dramatic fortissimo, then I need to make sure that I don't waste my loudest playing, my best fortissimo playing before this point. It means any fortissimo I come across before page 4 can't be as loud. This is really important. Otherwise, this moment won't have as much drama and oomph as it needs to tell the story effectively. Even when you're learning a piece like Clair de Lune, which barely goes above a mezzo piano in its entire duration, you still have to kind of go through the same like dynamic plan. If mezzo piano is like the highest volume, where does that occur? Does that occur with where the climactic moment of the piece is, which usually, yes, usually the loudest part of a piece is going to be the climactic moment. So you still want to go through it and map it out and figure out where the peaks are. And then one thing too, is if your dynamic range in a piece is limited. So say the quietest range is pianissimo and your loudest range is mezzo piano, that's not a very wide range. So you have to think about how you're going to be able to differentiate a piano from a pianissimo from a mezzo piano, and that could be a little bit more of a challenge to do. So one thing you can consider is maybe you make the mezzo piano a little louder than you would otherwise in a different piece. Not so much that you would end up making the whole thing sound romantic, but maybe just a little bit. If you have a dynamic plan for your piece, that should be able to then make your dynamics in general more effective. One point that I always try to get across to my students, and one that they're really likely to ignore, is the idea that you want to integrate dynamics right from the start of learning a piece. I know that sounds crazy, because when you're first learning a piece, there's all the notes you have to figure out, there's all the rhythms you have to figure out. There's just like an overwhelming amount of detail all at once. But
wait a second.
If you integrate dynamics in the beginning, which seems difficult but is doable, you're building that dynamic into the way you practice so that it just ends up feeling more natural and more organic than it would if you added it over top of it. It's kind of like how a stew tastes better the second day because all the spices have had a day to like sit and meld together, going down the cooking compared to the ravioli again, I see. But the dynamics end up integrating that way and sounding more natural. And you also shouldn't have to spend a lot of time like memorizing dynamics later on because if you just always been playing a certain passage at a certain volume, it'll just be instinctual. This also helps you avoid mechanical playing. So if you're focused on creating a beautiful sound and playing dynamics as a part of that right from the get-go, then that's going to safeguard you from having robotic performances when you're not focused on expression or dynamics of any kind and you're literally just learning the notes and the rhythms. There's a tendency to just like compartmentalize and play in a way that sounds mechanical. So again, that's just another idea. All right, so here's a quick summary of the most important steps on playing dynamics on the piano. Understand the era you're playing so that your dynamic choices are appropriate. Use
Алло! Привет, мам, привет! Да, я сплю, я сегодня еще делал. Ну да, сплю.
Нет, ты вообще-то болеешь, что ли? Заболел, поэтому так долго спишь?
Да не знаю, нет, просто так. Отдых.
А долго не очень спишь днем, да?
Ну да.
Если хочешь, завтра приезжай после обеда. Мы где-то в 3 часов дома будем. Я только хочу, чтобы ты к нам приехал.
Ладно, там как-то, не знаю, пока не здоров. Ты-то здоров, нормально? Ты у тебя нормально?
Да нормально все, нормально. Просто тебя долго не вижу. Не знаю, как ты живешь, переживаю.
Да тихо,
Как
нормально?
тебе?
Нормально, тихо. Нормально.
Где у тебя еда-то есть?
Да, пытаюсь.
Ладно, на следующей неделе, если что, только выходной мы сможем заехать. На этой неделе нам некогда будет.
Ладно, да.
Ну ты звони, если что-то, ладно? Звони мне, пожалуйста.
Ладно, да.
Если надумаешь, завтра приезжай, после 3 мы дома.
Спасибо вам, спасибо.
Ладно, давай, дорогой.
Ладно,
Пока.
да.
Не болей.
Ладно, да. Agora tem туда, ложи прямо туда. Это я не трогаю. 6. Oh, thank you, Miss Juice. Thank you, Dubs. Jules Box. Hey, gratitude. Oxygen. Toxic. А, нет, по-другому там было сделано, да. Если это уровень труд, ну, он вот это он про себя говорит. Жарис, нет, нет. Это не это что?
Как делают кашемировый свитер?
Привет, это Банкиру, самый большой финансовый супермаркет. Банкиру подберет выгодный кредит.
Здорово!
Almost all the foods out there, in one way or another, will spike insulin. Even protein spikes insulin. But when protein spikes insulin, it's also bringing up something called glucagon, which kind of balances it out and kind of makes it a net zero response. But let's talk about the foods that really don't have an insulin spike. And if they do, they are super negligible. Now, there is a difference between foods that cause traditional spike in glucose versus foods that don't trigger much of an insulin spike. And what you have to look at mainly is fiber. Okay, the biggest piece is fiber. Fiber and fat do not spike insulin. But the problem that we face with fiber is generally, when you look at fiber, it's usually combined with other things, combined with starches, combined with sugars, stuff like that. So you're still getting an insulin spike. So I've got a few foods for you. Some of them are fibers, some of them are fats, and then I even have a couple of proteins. Now, first off, I want you to take a look at the image that's on the screen right now. Okay, this is from a study that was really testing insulin concentrations, glucose, everything with different foods. And I want you to look down the bottom right there and see where it shows proteins. See how a lot of the proteins have a higher spike in insulin, even compared to other foods, even to some starches? Isn't that wild? Well, what's happening is you're having that insulin spike, but what this document isn't showing is it's not showing the glucagon spike. So the actual relative amount of insulin that's related in terms of blood glucose isn't really there. Okay, so you can have a lower spike in insulin, but actually have a worse impact. Anyhow, let's get to the fun stuff. So the first one is going to be shirataki noodles. Okay, these are a specific kind of glucomannan fiber. They are pretty much solid, soluble fiber, which almost sounds kind of funny, but a soluble fiber is something that draws water in. I am a fan of soluble fiber because it actually ferments in the gut and has a powerful effect. Okay, it actually has a metabolic benefit. Okay, so in addition to just being a fiber that pushes things through, it actually does something. It feeds the bacteria within our gut. Okay, so that is what's called a glucomannan fiber. Okay, another one that is really good is one called galactomannan fiber, which is going to be in things like fenugreek. Okay, now that's not necessarily a food, so I don't want to get you excited about that one, but it's in the same ballpark. Okay, hearts of palm. Okay, so palm hearts, hearts of palm pasta, things like that. I've talked about that before on my channel. Practically no insulin spike whatsoever because they are soluble fibers that draw water in, don't have much of an impact, and there's not other carbs surrounding them. Think about beans for a minute. Beans have a high amount of fiber in them, but they also have a bunch of some indigestible sugars and some very digestible sugars. That's why they are a high carb food, even though some of it's resistant, and I'm not going to talk about resistant starch today. Another one is going to be chia and flax. Now, you're not just going to go munch on these things willy-nilly on their own, but there are things called flax crackers. Like if you look out there, there's plenty of companies that make crackers out of straight flax, just flaxseed, right? And flax contains what's called mucilage. Again, mucilage is a kind of fiber. Like if you were to take chia and you were to add water to it and let it sit, what gives it that gelatinous feel, like why it gels up and makes like a pudding with chia, is the mucilage. It is a very, very powerful hydrocolloid, meaning it draws a lot of water in. Not only is this good for satiety, but it gives you a very clear mechanical demonstration of how soluble fiber works, okay? So foods that are high in mucilage, so we've got chia, we've got flax, we've got those flax crackers, kelp, certain kinds of seaweed, even red seaweed. What's kind of weird is that even carrageenan, don't go looking for foods with carrageenan, but carrageenan that's coming from red seaweed is a form of soluble fiber in a way. It's just kind of weird. Some of the snacks and the things I talk about, there's a link down below to check out Thrive Market. They're an online membership-based grocery store. So like you can just sort by snacks, you can look at the fiber content, you can do all kinds of things. So no matter what kind of diet you're doing, whether it's keto or fasting, whatever, it is perfect for these kinds of things. So I know they have some seaweed snacks. I know they have flax crackers called flackers. Anyway, so use that link down below, 25% off your first order and a free gift when you use that link because they're a huge sponsor on this channel and they sponsored this video. So check them out down below. So I mentioned kelp and seaweed. Let's dive into that as sort of the next one. This is a food that you can eat that is not going to trigger an insulin spike. Okay, first of all, practically no starches to it whatsoever. It's pretty much just going to be some nutrients, some minerals, and some fiber. And once again, it is a soluble fiber. Now, there are multiple different categories of seaweed. One of my favorite ones is nori, okay, just straight up nori. So if you're looking for something that might be like a simple snack, you could literally take nori, roll up shirataki noodles in it, put a little bit of like tamari or a little bit of sauce that has like no carbs whatsoever, and you're not going to have an insulin spike. So that's kind of tastes like a little Asian burrito. Something that I've done before. Okay, the next one. Now we have to jump over. Okay, we know fibers play a role for a second, but let's touch on fats. Straight fats are not going to spike insulin. You notice pull that document back up on the screen again. Fats aren't even investigated. They're looking at some nut butters, things like that, but fats aren't even looked at because fats don't trigger an insulin response. They can to a very, very small degree, but it's almost immeasurable. So in this case, I would recommend that you look at coconut butter. Okay, coconut butter has a higher fiber content, although most of the fiber in coconut butter is insoluble fiber versus soluble fiber. It doesn't make it bad. It just still has no blood sugar impact, but you're looking at a relatively high fat content, only a couple of grams of carbs, most of which are coming from insoluble fiber. So that, in essence, if you are watching insulin, is it a good food to eat? Granted, there's a big difference between doing keto and doing a low insulin diet, okay? But either way, they can both interchange and have a lot of crossover. The next ones are going to be, okay, not only only are they super packed with nutrients, not only are they great for cooking, not only are they tremendous if you saute them in some coconut oil and still don't change the insulin impact, but they are packed with the insoluble fiber, not attached to another starch, not attached like squash to other starches and things like that. We're just getting straight up soluble fiber in a good green leafy vegetable form. Okay, now it's funny, again, if we look at that same document, we see the proteins. Now, if we look at beef as compared to some of these other foods, you see, beef has a relatively, well, moderate insulin spike, not compared to like all foods, but it's interesting though, when you look at eggs. Eggs have a pretty low insulin spike compared to other proteins. So I wanted to throw a protein in there in case we were looking for a higher protein, low insulin spiking food. Eggs would be the best. It's just interesting because they still spike insulin, but the glucagon response is nice and high with eggs as well. But in the world of all the different kinds of proteins, it is triggering the lowest insulin spike. Probably has to do with the fact that it's pretty concentrated with fat, and that's slowing down and attenuating any kind of response with that. Interestingly enough, if you look at proteins,